executive session. Copies of the draft minutes of May 4th and 19th meetings have been provided to the council members and have been posted on the city website, as have committee reports. We have 2 communications which you've all received, and they will be part of the conversation we will be having. We have 3 very simple resolutions, which I think we should get out of the way first, so then we can get down to the business. Shaheem Shusha claims he can't get in. Can you help him?
Yep.
Thank you. Okay. And Shaheem, can you put up the first resolution? By the way, everyone, we are transmitting on the radio. We are on YouTube, and we are here on Zoom, which is open to most. No, not that. Oh, sorry. Yeah, not that. The first resolution. Commissioner Deeds. There you go. Okay. So we all know how this goes. Can I have an introduction? Someone? Anyone? Jane? Jane, and a second.
Calvin.
Calvin? All right. Next resolution, please, Shaheem. Register Star. We do this every year. I've threatened to change it, but actually the rules are such that it has to be a newspaper that prints regularly. It can't be electronic media. So we don't really have much choice. And this is, of course, for all our legal notices. Can I have an introduction, please? Jane and Eileen? I think Eileen said yes.
I did. Yes.
Okay, and Shaheem, the third resolution, please. Yes, this is really just a technicality about how our legal advisors are paid. It's just a transfer from one line to another. Right, Jeff?
Yes, this is in line what we did last month, where you have to approve our invoices now monthly as opposed to just being regular payroll.
Right. So do I have an introduction?
Eileen.
Eileen, and a second, please.
Malachi.
Malachi, okay. Now, since we have by the way, whoever called in, if you're listening, I will not admit you until you identify yourself somehow. And I have someone that says Moore's family. I don't know who that is, but we'll take, I don't know if we should take it. As you all know, we've had some hacking, or maybe you don't know. 2 meetings recently have been hacked and unpleasant things resulted. So we're being a little more cautious about who we let into the Zoom. And whoever is 518-965-5828, I'm not inclined to let you in since I don't know who you are. Moore's family, geez, I don't know. There's a number of Moores. I guess that might be Don Moore, so maybe we'll let him. Should I try? I don't even, it's hard.
How are people supposed
You can
to
feel free to let anybody in. I'm just anybody who I feel like we don't know who it is. I'm just gonna watch.
Okay, so Moore family, I'll let in. There, and this phone number, that's the one you really got to watch next. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Good. Yeah, because I don't want to keep people out if we don't have to. Okay. The first order of business, and we have a guest, TJ Macchiaroli, who runs Hudson Paddles, and Michael Chimides is just going to give us a quick presentation on why he's here and what is going to happen. Take it away, Michael.
Hi,
Before
thanks,
you,
Hi, thanks everybody.
okay,
You okay?
yeah,
Um, So for the past several years, Hudson Paddles has had a contract with the city of Hudson where they offer paddleboard and other small watercraft rentals at both the waterfront and at Oakdale. And so there's a contract that just got it added to the docs. Like it somehow didn't make it onto the website earlier today. But we have a contract. We have a draft contract with TJ who runs the business, and it's very similar to the contract that happened in the past. The main change is that instead of having a flat fee for the entire summer, we broke it up into some smaller time increments. In part just because the rollout, I guess in total because of the rollout because of COVID. So we're a little behind on getting the docs in. So we weren't able to sort of address the contract previously, and then just not really knowing what the summer or what the early fall will be like in terms of public gathering and in terms of businesses. It didn't seem right to sort of commit to the entire season. So we basically just broke the contract up into sort of like a monthly fee structure. But otherwise, some slight changes into the insurance language and things like that. But otherwise, it's a similar contract to past years. And I think overall, this fits in with our vision of encouraging people to be outdoors, of making use of our public space, and of offering some nice recreational opportunities for the city.
So if we have a contract that we can circulate before the formal meeting, we could also have a resolution ready.
Yeah, sorry I didn't get the resolution in, but I'll definitely get the resolution before next week. And the contract is up on the website now. So
Oh,
if
it
you
is,
have,
okay, good.
yeah. So
So
if
for
you have
council members,
questions,
yeah.
you can reach out to both me and TJ and let me know. Or if you have questions now, I'm sure we can answer it.
So TJ, would you like to say anything?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, there's nothing really, like Michael said, there's really not a whole lot of change. This is the 4th year we've done it. Every year seems to get a little more traction. People come down, they see the park. A lot of them maybe haven't even been there before or just haven't been on the Hudson, and they've been in Hudson for a long time. So I'm mostly just wanted to chime in and be here if anybody had questions for me about how we run it or anything like that. Michael and I have been back and forth quite a few times. So Michael and I are both pretty much on the same page. He pretty much knows the operation as well as I do at this point. The big changes this year obviously are how we clean everything, how we sanitize everything. It used to be a little bit more just dry things off, wipe them down. Now it's, more of a sanitation and having, alcohol there for people's hands and things like that. And just informing them of how we use things and how we clean things. Most people that have showed up so far already are practicing everything they need to. So it seems like it's going to go well. But yeah, I'm just here really if you have questions for me.
So Councilman, any questions? And women. I don't see any hands raised or, Jane Trombley. Unmute yourself. Oh, you go.
Yeah, there you go. Hi, I should probably know this. Are you open? What are your hours of operation? I'm sorry if I missed it and you mentioned it earlier. And how late when do you cease? When do you stop? In September?
Hi, Jane. Yeah. We generally don't start before 10 a.m. and we try to be done by 6. So sometimes it runs a little later if people are taking a little longer. The river has current, so if people are just a little further away, sometimes 6:30, maybe I wrap up by 7. But our rule of thumb is really not letting anybody out after 4. 2 people are the main real 2 hours are our standard rental. And if they do rent at 4, we only give them the 2-hour option. So sometimes people run a little longer, but for the most part, we try to get out of there by 6. Sometimes we're done by 5.
Yeah.
We are working right now, just because it's early season, we're only keeping regular hours Saturday and Sunday, and we're doing by appointment Monday through Friday. When we got into the heart of our summer last year, we were there Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and we were doing the other 3 days by appointment. If the demand is there, we'll sit there. We have a small staff. There's 2 other employees that work, and if the demand is there, we'll sit there. Otherwise, we'll just do it by reservation.
Just curious, what do you charge for a 2-hour stint on the river?
Well, it varies in what you rent. This year's prices are $35 for a single kayak, and that includes your life jacket and your paddle. We give you the information about what the current's doing, since it changes every 7.5 hours about, and wind is a big factor too. We get pretty good wind down there. So that's always something that we have to consider. $35 for the 2 hours. Of a double kayak is $50. Paddleboard is $30. And then you can add hours to that.
Right. Okay.
And that's all at hudsonpaddles.com if you want to look at our website, and everything's posted there.
Yeah, okay. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jane.
I got a question, Tom.
Okay, go ahead, Dominic.
PJ, you don't do paddle boats?
No, who is this? I'm sorry, I can't
Dominic
see.
Moran. No, he's not. You can't. He's on the phone.
Okay, no problem. We do not have paddle boats.
Okay.
In our experience, they're not very efficient, but Lake Taconic does rent them, I believe.
Well, I was thinking paddle boats just for like Oakdale. I was thinking just like Oakdale having paddle boats, something like that.
Yes, that isn't a bad idea. I guess I should define what we do at Oakdale. At Oakdale, we are there very minimally. We're there or in the past, it's only been 2 days for 90 minutes each day, which we do through Bodie Spa, the business that my wife and I own. We do paddleboard yoga on the back and the deep end of Oakdale Lake, away from the swim area. So we're really not at Oakdale very much at all. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the council? Okay, TJ, thanks a lot. I hope we have everything ready for the next meeting so you can get started.
Well, thank you all very much. I appreciate it. Michael, thanks so much for everything you've been doing to get this moved along.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, AJ.
Before we go on to the next order of business, I had suspicion that some of you are here under the misinformation that we will be discussing short-term rentals. I don't really know the origin of that because it's not been posted on the agenda. But if you are, we are not. So just letting you know. We are, however, discussing the Galvin project at North 7th Street. But before that, Michael is also here for another presentation. And he'll explain it to you as it was listed in the agenda. It is a DRI presentation related to Dunn Warehouse. Michael, take it away.
Hi, and there's two, I think there's 2 maps in the documents section on the city website that may or may not be helpful for you. So the DRI committee is tasked, one of our projects is the development of the Dunn Warehouse. We put out a request for interest or request for expressions of interest for developers to partner with the city to develop the Dunn Warehouse. We had 1 submission, and in conversations with that developer, they expressed that if the idea that Dunn would somehow be an anchor for developing this larger area, but at the same time, they felt like Dunn was possibly too small for their interest. And they were excited about working in Hudson, but they just they felt like Dunn wasn't necessarily would have enough impact on its own. And so that they were interested in sort of having a larger scope to think about that zone. The city owns 3 parcels that are just to the north of the Dunn parcel. So one idea would be to circle back with them as well as other developers and see what developers might be interested in doing and developing all 4 parcels. Being that it's city property, the city council, this is really a city council decision about whether or not we should proceed. So at this point, if you think we should proceed, you're basically saying that we think we should approach a developer, have some conversations about how those 4 parcels would be used. So not just Dunn, but sort of the section north of Dunn, which now includes sort of a parking lot and some undeveloped areas. It doesn't mean that the city council is guaranteeing that something would happen. And so ultimately the city council would still have the decision to approve any sort of agreement, but there's a general consensus that it's useful, that we are interested in developing those properties in partnership with the developer, and that we should proceed with those conversations. Alternatively, you could say no. You could say that we know that we don't want to work with the developer on those 3 conversations, or we don't want to work on a developer in tandem with the Dunn. In which case we could say no, and we could move forward with just the Dunn and see what happens. And it's possible that we'll still find a great deal, or maybe we won't. And we'll see what happens. And I imagine you're not ready for this at this moment, but you also could give some sort of vision or sort of specific guidelines. Yes, we want to develop these 4 parcels, and here's how we're thinking about those 4 parcels. And I think you could also do that in 2 steps. You could say, yes, we're interested in developing these things. Let's proceed with conversations. And then over the next month or 2, you could sort of add in guidelines. It's not like we're going to sign a deal with the developer in the next month or 2. This is going to be a several month process of engagement that we'll be back talking to the council, we'll be talking to the public. But as a first step, it's the question of, should we look at Dunn in tandem with these 3 other parcels?
This, Eileen, it seems to me we probably should have a lot of public conversation about that, since it looks like we could be considering developing that entire stretch. And I just wonder what the public, what the citizens feel in total. Myself, I have always hoped that there would not be big development down there, casting shadows towards the water. I think the Dunn is fine, but I'd like to be able to, talk to the people who I see when I walk down there all the time and say, hey, what would you think if we develop 1, 2, 3, or all 4,
Well, that would certainly be part of the process. I mean, there's no sense. All we're talking about here is whether the council is allowing the DRI committee to recast the RFP to say to the potential developers, would you like to include that as part of a potential project? And of course, if that happens, it would go through it would not be an immediate process. The problem is, I mean, sorry, I don't mean to, the problem is right now it looks like Dunn Warehouse on its own, I shouldn't say no, but developers are not really interested. I mean, think about it. It's a building sitting there sort of in a no man's land with trucks going by right around the corner. The only way you could even get to it is, of course, that way. And then the Ferry Street Bridge is still closed. So, it really is talking about a much more long-term project as a possibility.
Right.
So we're only just kind of opening up the process more.
Right. And just exactly to your point, Tom, I think there ought to be a lot of public conversation about that. I think if we were to, and it may be a DPW issue, I don't know how it gets going, but get that bridge work done to repair the old bridge it may look different to folks who may be interested in having a look at it.
That's true too. But yes, definitely when the bridge opens, it changes everything. And I have to say, I'm totally in agreement with you about how it should be developed. You don't want tall buildings blocking the water, the views. But I'm sure a developer would understand that too. And we're not even talking about what would the content of those places be, I mean, so it's just to give them a chance to be more creative. Really, that's all it seems to me. Anyway, go ahead.
I just would want to be careful not to let them think that there's consensus one way or another among the council at this point about expanding the opportunity for a single developer. Because
I mean, I don't think that there's anything wrong in terms of how Michael proposed. If we are just entertaining an expansion of types of bids or interest, and then over the next month, if we do develop specific parameters that we think either environmentally or for scale, to make sure that public concerns and our own concerns are being met, I think it makes sense for us to take, or at least to allow for a different type of scope of bidding now down there. If for anything, to see what could pop up already, and then it gives us time to buy in and develop something that's a little more specific and with public input.
and you wouldn't be concerned that some or several developers might invest a lot of money thinking we'd be willing to develop a lot.
Not at this stage. I mean, I think it's so preliminary that it would just be, I think as Michael's describing it, and I think as Tom's trying to say, it's just really to maybe come up with some sort of incentive perhaps, but not that direct. I mean, just if it's such a hemmed in project and they think this seems that a lot of developers are being turned off by the size, to give an opportunity for just to broaden the discussion. I don't think it's going to create any, I don't think we're going to be making an impression untoward to any potential developer right now.
In fact, by the DRI committee issued an RFI, a request for interest, not an RFP. So there weren't actual projects. This wouldn't even invite necessarily defined projects. It would find developers who might be interested if those properties were possibly in play. So we're not giving away anything here, really, except to say that, go ahead, think about it. But anyway, and of course, that's all part of the DRI process too. There's plenty of. So I think, Michael, how about we take a vote on this next meeting about, of some sort? Just
I have a question. What are some other potential, what have been some past ideas about those properties that the city owns? What are some other uses aside from having them as a package?
I don't know any.
So, Michael, I have a question about what kind of acreage are we talking? What the Dunn warehouse sits on? I don't know, I'm going to say 2 acres. I don't know. What is the acreage of this additional property that's being considered for development?
I guess I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. I know you can look at the map on the city website for scale. It shows, you can look at a parcel map, and then the city hired Chazen to sort of manage the DRI process, and they did this sort of report on Dunn that included sort of what they're calling a vision map of that whole little zone where they plopped in a bunch of buildings. But it's that section that basically is now functioning as a parking lot / storage, all opposite the waterfront. So it is a pretty sizable section that, unless our plan is to kind of keep it as a dirt, like our gravel parking lot, it's sort of being underutilized. Yeah. So I think most people would look at that zone and be like, this isn't really what we want, how we want to use it in the long term. And I think the question would be, well, if we want to change it, do we feel like it's worth engaging a developer for how we would change it? And I think the sort of tension between what Eileen is talking about and also John is that we're not committing to whatever developer comes up with, we're going to accept, right? So we could say, hey, what do you guys think? And they could come back with ideas, and then the council ultimately will still look at that and decide whether or not to accept that idea or not, right? So it's not like they're going to come back and say well, you said we could use 4 parcels, and so how dare you not accept our 4 parcels? On the other hand, if the council is pretty confident that almost anything within almost any idea would be rejected, it's why waste our time going through the process of doing all this research and buying developers if everything is basically going to be rejected? If we're if the council's pretty confident that all they want that to be is a gravel parking lot, then there's no reason to sort of waste our time going to a developer. So that's sort of so So there's sort of a gray areas to be like, well, what is a developable that we would still want? And I think it's fine to say, well, you know what, we're excited about developing those other 3 parcels, but it can only be this tall, or there needs to be a lot of green space, or there needs to be some sort of public zone in there, or like whatever. There needs to be a lot of parking. Like, I don't know what the criteria is, but in some ways the council could name what those criteria is as part of that vision. And it's not binding, but I guess that's how I'm thinking about it. So it's really up to the council to decide, do you want to sort of charge the DRI, look on a bigger scoped project?
And that's the essence of the question. Do you keep it a gravel parking lot, or do you explore options unnamed, maybe unimagined at this point, with no parameters, but just to move forward or not?
And there's some tension between, you can define a lot of parameters, and that can be helpful for developers because they can say, hey, I see what you want, I'm going to plug into that. But sometimes you can also define parameters in a way that basically creates something that's like not possible. You know, we can say this is what we want, and then basically every developer will look at that and be like, that's not really a feasible thing. So there's some balance between creating parameters that seem useful versus creating parameters that sort of like make a project sort of impossible. And sometimes having some flexibility invites a developer to be creative and sort of bring ideas to us that we hadn't thought of. That's not to say that we should have no parameters, but there's also a risk of having too specific of parameters that we might miss out, because ultimately the council will still have the decision-making power. So it makes sense to allow a little bit of flexibility for the developer to basically bring in their ideas and give them room to convince you.
So
but if you know that you don't want something, let's not waste anybody's time.
Right. So the connectivity project was part of the DRI as well. And it seems like this is close enough to that it would kind of have relationship spatially with that initiative. I throw this idea out. Won't put you on the spot, Michael, to answer the question, but I throw this out for just to have everybody think about it, is that how we might want to follow similar planning specs or similar sort of a similar approach to the connectivity thing. I mean, as we did with the connectivity thing to this parcel, because it seems like it's kind of a piece. And maybe there's some synergies there that would make sense as we think about how it might be developed.
Well, I can speak to that because I don't know if you're aware, Jane, but one of the ideas with the connectivity project is that they will be providing us with sort of guidelines how to use their methods for other projects within the city.
Did not know that. Okay.
So
that's kind of where I'm going with this.
Right,
So.
because it's going to require some kind of streetscape, some kind of sidewalk. I mean, it involves the same issues. Absolutely.
Okay, so that's what I'm awkwardly getting towards. It seems like it should be of a piece. Okay, thanks. That answers it for me anyway.
Michael, it's Dominic. So just as if it's not binding and we can add these partials, wouldn't that be also more inviting for more investors to come in, not just isolating just to done, but it'd be more inviting to have more investors come in with better ideas?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Michael, he's asking you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it certainly opens up more options. We have more parcels, and it is. You're right. At this stage, it's not a binding commitment.
And it's not going to cost us anything. So, I mean, I would think it'd be a good idea to to see what else is out there. As we expand this, to see what other things can be come into that area. Just a thought.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it'll cost our time. So, but if we're interested in moving forward, that's a worthwhile investment. So it's sort of like, we don't want to invite a bunch of investors to give us their ideas if we're going to ultimately we're not interested in any of them. It just sort of annoys the developers and it wastes our time. But if we're like, yes, let's explore how to use those 4 parcels, I think this makes sense. And again, the council can put on parameters to sort of weed out the projects that are less interesting.
Okay.
So Mike, oh, sorry. So Michael, perhaps you could craft some kind of non-binding resolution that we could vote on next week.
Just to say that we're interested in exploring
yes,
the four parcels in total and hear from developers.
Yep.
Okay. And that's great. And then just to also to go off of Eileen's point, like if the council wants to invite any sort of public comment and sort of craft a vision for that zone, I think that would be great. And I'd love to partner with the council on doing that.
Okay, can I just toss in that within the language of this non-binding resolution, we put something in about the fact that it will either reflect the ideas or the standards or the whatever of the connectivity plan, so it draws it together. I mean, I think
sure. Why
I'd
not?
like to see that. Just a sentence. Thank you.
Right, and I think specifically this, Eileen, we should probably touch base with the boat club and, some other places already down there. I'm sure we will hear from the folks who are very concerned with coming through the South Bay and the riverfront. So there'll be lots of interest, I think.
Oh, yeah.
I would just want to reinforce the idea. This is so preliminary that
Right.
However, it should be fairly broad right now, and we're raising some very good concerns. But I just think as we've discussed, this is not going to be a very specific type of phase here. So I think we could move ahead with this and not be too cautious at this point.
Okay, so let's move along. We have people waiting. I guess we should go to the Galvin discussion now, which means Calvin, we're putting you in the waiting room. See you later. Dan Kent is here. Thank you for coming, Dan. Before we get started, a couple things. I want to remind everybody what we're actually being asked to do here. We're being asked to approve a pilot. There will be other opportunities in the future. And by the way, we're only being asked to approve a pilot so that the foundation can then apply to the state. So this is part of a longer process. And by the way, Dan, what is your timeline for application? Do you have one?
The state still has not yet released the application yet. I think with all of the fiscal uncertainty they're facing from COVID-19 and the lack of clarity on whether additional support will be coming from Washington, a lot of agencies are just kind of on pause right now.
Right.
So we still don't have an application yet, but our goal and the goal of all affordable housing developers is to make sure that we're as ready as possible when it's released, because given those fiscal constraints, it's going to be the most competitive year ever.
Right. And it was originally a May application deadline, wasn't it?
They were hoping for May.
Yeah. Okay. So Dan is here. You've
Tom, if I just interrupt for 1 minute, just you're not actually approving a pilot on this. You're expressing a support for it.
Sorry. Correct.
Because it's going through further review and final things that have to have seeker done before you're actually committing to it, but you're expressing your support for it. So there's always going to be a chance to change.
Thank you. And I've circulated both the evaluation that we commissioned from the Benjamin Center. And I see out there, there was one email today, question again, why did Galvin pay for it? So it must be there. The fix is in. It is not. We commissioned the Benjamin Center. Galvin paid for it, much in the way that if you go before the planning board, you have to pay for the consultant and you don't get to pick it. We picked it. And by we, I mean the subcommittee of council members. And there's also a new sheet which indicates, among other things, that the picture that was on the previous sheet was just a stand-in picture. This is closer, I suppose, to the actual building, but even that obviously will change over time. So I just also want to point out that the thing we cannot forget is we do have a strategic housing plan. Here's my copy. I'm not telling you what you have to believe, but I believe this project is does answer many of the questions and goals of the strategic housing plan. And I remind you that another comment that was submitted on the website said that the power elite determined this plan. Well, I guess that means Tiffany Garriga, Rebecca Wolf, and Dominic Moranti, among others, are part of the power elite. But I don't really see it that way. Putting that aside. A lot of the questions and has been published on the city website. There were 12 responses and a couple others that we got through emails that are also posted. And just a couple things that I want to ask Dan, but I'll open up to you guys first about what your new questions. And by the way, this sheet that I circulated incorporates many of the things you've already asked Dan about and changes you've asked for. So I open it up to the council.
Tom, this is Eileen. I remain in, my thought is 40 years is extraordinary in what I've seen before for housing. And just for the points that Dan made about the uncertainty at the state level, we have equal amounts of uncertainty, if not more, at the city level. I think it's premature to get too far ahead of ourselves before we know what our own fiscal results are going to be this year and what it's going to look like for next year.
Okay. If in the evaluation, you may notice that 40 years is actually considered well within the scope. Secondly, and they understand, the study does express an understanding that COVID-19.
Why are you answering those questions?
Oh, you mean why aren't they here?
I mean, if Eileen's raising them as a general point about the.
Yes, I understand that. But
Yeah.
What I wanted to build up to, John, was there's an answer in here. The answer is on page 7. Very interesting. They actually suggest extending the pilot to 50. Do you remember this part, anybody?
Yes.
Yeah. And the reasoning is, oh, go ahead, Dominic, go ahead. You answered. That's fine with me.
Well, I actually spoke to Josh today. So the reasoning is so it keeps it a little longer into the tax payment, I believe, something to that effect, he said. And also, I mean, one of the things that, he said, which, this evaluation didn't, submit, which is normal, is the financial that is missing. Normally when they do the evaluation, there's a financial element to it. So I think this report that we have is inconclusive. It's not complete without that financial component to it. I have some concerns that after, whether it's 40 or 50 years, that there's no promise currently that Gowan will not turn that into a non-for-profit and then totally take it off the tax rolls.
That's exactly what I wanted to point out.
Excuse me?
That's the answer that I was trying to express. And in fact, if they lowered it to say 30, they could turn it into a nonprofit entity after 30 years. Because that's when the tax abatement that the investors are interested in would cease to be in play after 30 years.
The financials are a very valid point. I've talked to other people who've been involved in these sorts of things in other communities, and there's a lot of transparency from the get-go in terms of what the financial breakdown is. I think that's a very valuable point that Dominic's raising. Additionally,
can I ask a
question? One second. Additionally, the report that we got from the Benjamin Center lists as a comparative assessed value for the project. So I mean, if there's no, I mean, if you guys right now have no estimated value for what this project would be worth if you built it, it seems that's a big question. I think we have to answer. You don't have any idea how much this thing is going to be. You don't have your own internal concept of what this would cost once it's built 3 or 4 years from now, what it would be assessed at.
So to the first point, if I may, we provided all financial information that was requested by the Benjamin Center, and the report even notes that compared to some other projects they've analyzed, we offered a particularly high level of transparency. So if there's other financial information that was necessary for issuing the report, it was never requested from me by Josh from the Benjamin Center.
Right. I'm talking about how some of these things are pursued in other communities in terms of what the get-go is from what you got, what is presented in terms of financials. Maybe so from the Benjamin Center, they were fine, but I don't know. I just think that there's.
What do you mean, John? What financials? I'm not being.
I just think there's a general level of seeing what kind of instrument that you use to come up with your, which are, some of them are in there, but just more detail. We're presented with not a lot of detail, and now we're suddenly getting more detail as we move along. So that's all I'm saying. And then besides, but the big sticking point for me is the estimated value of the project initially from a construction standpoint. That should be something that's known, and then that we could have a comparative net assessment.
So the total development cost on the fact sheet that we've published is 22 million. I can try to pull together some information on the estimated appraised value, but the total development costs gives some indication, but we can get that information. My understanding from Josh is that wasn't a piece of information they needed to issue the report and be able to conclude whether or not it was fair relative to other projects. But I'm certainly happy to hear more about the financial information that you feel was lacking.
Well, I mean, I think the important question about the assessed value is certainly this is a good thing that you guys want to do, but the value of that project will affect the overall tax burden on other properties, correct? It would still be fit into our overall assessment role. So that should still become an issue for other taxpayers in the community. So I think that's something we should consider.
I mean, I think generally, and I know this question came up during the last council meeting, our belief is that when you take care of the needs of vulnerable populations and working people, low-income people in a community, that improves the quality of life for everyone. And in those cases, the result can be an increase in taxes because as a place becomes more desirable to live, assessments can go up. So
I wouldn't dispute that, Dan. I mean, I certainly believe that we should be helping the people who are housing insecure, et cetera, in this community. I'm very committed to that. At the same time, we have a declining population, and the burden, the tax burden, is something to consider about the people who live here and pay property taxes, because that is a cost that would be borne by this across the community. And it's something that's worthy, certainly, but we just, in terms of just the information for us to vet, I think that's all I'm asking.
Sure. And this project is really about housing cost burdened households. So I'm glad you're raising that. And, we know from looking at the data in Hudson that around 2/3 of people earning under 80% of the area median income are housing cost burdened in the city of Hudson. So, that's why we're bringing this project forward, is to address that really urgent need.
Yes,
John, I'll go. Malachi, please.
no, I was just gonna piggyback off of John. That's just actually my main concern right there. What was just said. So, with the assessment.
Right. The Cheryl came up with a very vague, Cheryl Kozluga, our assessor, came up with a very broad potential assessment between $8 and $10 million. I don't have the ability to assess what that would mean in terms of individual tax burden if it was added to the.
Well, I mean, I just think that seems for a 70-unit building, I don't know.
That's Cheryl. She's our assessor.
I know. Well, I'm just saying. I mean, there's something I think we could drill down a little further here. Is all.
Sure, but I'm saying that would be the figure to begin with. No, I mean, if that's who's going to be assessing it.
Sure.
Or the 22 million that Dan is projecting as the cost. I mean, often when you get an ordinary work permit much smaller, that will increase, your assessment it guides how your assessment goes up if you redo a room, expand walls. So I think that the cost of construction is instructive.
And again, I think I want this to be a really good proposal, and I think
I hear you, John.
I know that, and I'm not trying to be totally skeptical of what the foundation is trying to do here. I just think in terms of some other of these proposals that I've seen, there's different metrics in terms of how much the private entity is willing to commit in terms of overall investment per unit first. That does affect the pilot. So I'm just but beyond that, I just think we could still afford a little more time here to be to answer some good questions.
Yes.
Sure. Dan, could you, that question about if it was, why would Cheryl come up with that figure based on your costs? Is that a standard thing with a?
I'll defer to the city assessor's determination. The assessor has all of the information that I'm referencing here, all of the info on project financials.
So John, I will talk to Cheryl Kozluga again and see, based on all this, if she could come up with.
I think a good thing for us to do would be to compare other affordable housing projects of a similar type of scope against the financials that are presented here, and see how they bear out. In a much more specific way than the Benjamin. I appreciate what the Benjamin Center did, because it fits our goals, and certainly this is something we want to do here in this community. But in terms of making sure that we're really vetting the financials of it.
Sure. No, I agree 100%.
If there could be a bigger commitment from in terms of construction cost off the bat, what they're willing to pay in terms of their own of the private capital up front, rather than what's trying to be leveraged elsewhere. So I have a lot of questions, but I could talk to Dan privately about it as well.
Yeah, let's touch base further, because I'd like to understand which elements of the financials you'd like to see more.
Sure, it's just more about in terms of how, what you're. We'll just talk privately, but it's in terms of what you're unlocking versus how much is being put up by you guys first, or if more could be put up in terms of lowering the overall cost, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure. Yeah, I can talk through the different sources that we're using for the project. It's a relatively standard affordable housing development that uses sources like low-income housing tax credits and other state subsidies, which are specifically designed to support projects that serve a broader range of incomes and include some moderate and middle income units. Right. That all being said, it's a pretty standard approach to project.
I guess I'm trying to understand how much of the costs are trying to, what you're trying to balance versus the initial investments in construction, et cetera, versus the overall benefit and the cost of the long-term project. And I know there are different calculations that other developers have used to achieve some of the same things. So we could talk privately about it, but I want, again, it's not to specifically try to knock down this project. It's just, I want to get as much information as possible before we go ahead with it.
Yep.
So Dan, can you talk a little bit about, you're changing sort of the configuration of the apartments, and see that you've dropped studios, you've added a couple of 3-bedrooms. It's kind of a swap out.
Sure.
Are we to take the for 2020 income limits and rent projections and apply that to the 3-bedroom units based on the various income limits?
Yes.
Okay.
So first, to that question, I think the first part of the answer is just a thank you to the Common Council and to the citizens of Hudson who've provided input on the project. I've had conversations with Tom, long conversations with Alderwoman Garriga, and she in particular highlighted a concern that I understand a lot of folks shared, which was that these studio units just seemed too small, and that wasn't the right type of housing given the needs in the city of Hudson. And the other concern was that for a lot of families, a 2-bedroom apartment just wouldn't work, and that the project needed to include some 3 bedrooms. So what we did is we asked our architects to remove the studios and put in as many 3-bedrooms as we could for the project. So that's how we got to this new unit mix. It was really a direct response to input from the council, which I think has clearly strengthened the project and made it more responsive to housing needs in the city. As far as the second part of your question, yes. The only caveat is I think I need to add updated utility allowance information for the 3 bedrooms. I don't think the architect supplied that for us originally because we were just talking about 2 bedrooms. So I'll send you an updated HUD AMI spreadsheet so you can see what the rent works out to be for all of the units once you factor the utility.
So
There was another question that that was part of the initial project, and that had to do with the utility allocation. $100 didn't seem quite adequate since most homeowners pay, more than that. So can you comment on that, or?
Yes, so those
where that's
estimates
going?
come directly from the green building consultant working on the project. The reason that those numbers appear low is because this is a NYSERDA Building of Excellence. So it's received a $1 million award to put in place some really cutting edge green building technology, including a major emphasis on passive design, which creates these wonderfully sealed apartments that don't leak out a lot of heat. So it doesn't cost a lot to heat the units because the heat is staying in.
Okay, I'm speaking specifically of the water charge, which.
Oh, yeah, that's been adjusted. We've been using an underwriting standard, and I've corrected that since. So it should be the, what is it, 425?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, so it is consistent with what other homeowners, okay.
Yes. No.
With the, yeah, and I applaud the green building standards.
Oh, you were talking about the other utilities.
No.
So-
Sewer water.
Dan, okay. Dan, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, what do you think about the parking? Because it's off. I mean, how are you gonna do it's 77 unit? How are you gonna get all that parking? That's what I'm concerned about.
So this project will be relying on street parking. So residents will be expected to find parking on street. We are unable to include a parking garage in this project. It's just wouldn't be feasible to build if we included a parking garage, and there's no space on the lot to create parking. So we've done parking studies in the surrounding area in the past, which have showed a significant number of spots available at various different times of day, including weekends. And if asked by the planning board, we'll be happy to produce that kind of study again if needed.
Dan, this is Eileen. What about using the lot east on the other side of 7th Street for parking for residents of the building?
So like the lot that this proposed project is on, we feel that lot is well suited for additional mixed use projects into the future. So we think given the central location of these lots, it's very important from a climate resiliency perspective, from a smart growth perspective, to make sure that we're maximizing the opportunities to create housing that's walkable. And I think that's one of the things many people love about the city of Hudson is the need to not necessarily have a car. So we think that's the best use for that lot.
So you wouldn't consider using part of the vacant property across the street?
No, we're looking at that as a development site as well.
So Dan,
Can I ask a question about something else, or are we still talking about parking?
No, we're
can I
still,
ask a question?
Dominic, go
Question
ahead.
real quick. Thank you. So Dan, you said that the original site across the street that you changed. Now you're saying in this sentence that might be another site for mixed apartments?
For a mixed use building, meaning a building with residential units on the upper floors and commercial on the ground floor.
Okay, so the strategic housing did say something about, not clustering housing too. That was one of the things too, is not clustering housing. So it won't be affordable housing. It would be a market rate housing.
We're still in the process of developing our plans for that site, but currently we're looking at an approach that would include more market rate housing. But I'll be sure to share more.
So that project would be good enough for that, but wouldn't be good enough for this site that wouldn't be applicable, but it's applicable for future development, but not developing housing on that corner piece.
So the reason we chose to move across the street to the other sites was not about which site is better necessarily or nicer to live at. The reason is that we thought it was a more straightforward project, which is important given that we're applying for such competitive state financing. So we wanted to be able to present a project that had the most limited number of potential complexities and hurdles. And that's what we have on the other side of the street. The original lot at 7th and State, the one closer to the railroad tracks, it's still a wonderful place for a building. But we have the ability to take more time to work through those complexities. And we just didn't want them to hinder our ability to get this really critical source of state funding that makes this type of project possible.
And with that development, you'll be asking for a pilot for that development also?
So we're still, it's far too early for me to get into any development plans for that site. We're still thinking through what's possible there.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Rebecca had a question.
thanks. Dan, I was wondering if you could describe how the proposal now responds to the concern about maintaining the affordability over time. There are some averages that are presented, and I know that a lot of us had wondered how that could be addressed. The idea being that right now, or as the proposal was originally submitted, there's nothing that guarantees the level of affordability on an average. So we were hoping, or I was certainly hoping to see something that would address that. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So right now we're committing to the 3 different ranges. And I think an important point to note is that at every end of those ranges, whether you're at the lowest or the highest end, these units are still meeting really pressing housing needs for folks who otherwise don't have many options in the city of Hudson. But that being said, if you wanted to take a look at the 40 to 60% AMI range, and I know currently I have that underwritten to provide only 40 and 50% AMI units. So I'd be happy if you want to discuss a kind of average for that tier that we could commit to. Because I understand, I think your concern is you want to make sure that this project is continuing to serve those very low income households. Is that correct?
And also that just at the overall level, like apparently right now, as proposed, there's an average unit rate of below 70% AMI, and that you maintain, like if that's the level of affordability that the project is proposing to offer, that be what is maintained.
Okay. Let me take a look at how we could structure that. I understand what you're looking for here, and let me see if we can come up with a figure that works. Maybe it would apply to certain tiers and not the project as a whole, but let me give that a little more thought. But I understand your question.
Okay.
Could I just ask for clarification on Rebecca's question? So the original pilot structure had a certain percentage of the units at each of these tiers, 35, right. 35, and 30% within those 3 tiers. There wasn't an overall average. There was a requirement to have a certain number of units at each tier, right? I
Yeah.
just want to make sure that that's the way it was originally structured in the pilot. So I just want to clarify, what are you looking for?
To average out within each tier so that that average is maintained. So in other words, right now,
So you mean they're not all at 60%? They're not all at
no,
80%?
they're not all at the max of every tier.
That's what I mean.
Yes.
Yeah, so from the 90 to 130% tier, you'd want to split commit to an average income limit of 120% of AMI, just throwing numbers out there. But that's
Right.
the essence of the request, right? Great.
Yeah. Yep.
So Dan,
Thank you.
so Dan, the lowest income amount for the studio was $20,000. That's the lowest you can make.
So
Is that what it was?
pull up my charts here. Yes, and let me make sure I'm referring to the one bedrooms here, but 40% AMI, the income limit, meaning the most that you could make for a one bedroom is around 22,500.
Okay, the most. Okay, because most people with disability on SSI only get a $700 a month check. So that they're not excluded out of there because of that low income. Correct?
I'm sorry, I want to make sure I understand. Could you rephrase your question?
Most people with disabilities that are receiving SSI, the most they get from SSI is about $700 a month. So they're not going to be excluded, especially if they get Section 8 housing, a voucher, from applying and being accepted into that income, because it's lower than 23. So they just can't make more than 23. Is there a limit on how less you can make, or is it just totally going to go by your AMI?
Yeah, so if you don't have a voucher, you need to make within the right range, right? Because you can't make too much that you no longer qualify for the apartment. Because if a person makes more than 40% of the area median income, then they aren't low income enough to qualify for the benefit of being able to rent the apartment. However, if you were making 20% of AMI and you didn't have any kind of rental subsidy, then you wouldn't be able to afford the rent of that 40% AMI apartment. So there's really a kind of 5 to 10% of AMI range that a person needs to fit into, where they're not making too much, but they're also not making too little. But that being said, if someone has a housing choice voucher, then they'll be able to afford apartments at a number of different income tiers if they meet their requirements, including 30%, 50%, and even up to 60% AMI could be afforded with a housing choice voucher.
But if somebody's making $700 on SSI, and for some reason, a couple years ago or whatever, they lost the benefit of the housing voucher for whatever reason, they will not be able to live in these apartments.
Right, they would need to have sufficient income to be able to afford the rent. That being said, our staff, I'm sorry, Calvin isn't here as a Galvin housing counselor to explain this better than I can, but we do provide support to individuals who are exactly in that type of situation to help connect them with the right resources to address benefit or income issues that threaten their housing stability.
Okay, thank you.
In your last iteration, Dan, you had, I believe there were 8 program-based vouchers available within this complex. Is that correct? I can't remember the exact.
Yeah, so we're planning to apply for 8 project-based vouchers. That's
okay, over the different housing unit groups. So 8 that will be spread across 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units.
Yes, across the different unit types. That's right.
Right. Okay. A total of 8. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Can you tell me what your information, the background information that supports the need for 77 units of affordable housing?
The need, yeah. So the first thing is really the Strategic Housing Action Plan. There's an extensive assessment of housing needs and housing cost burden households. Yes, so that is the best source document I could point you to. That being said, this project, like all projects that pursue financing through the state, also needs to obtain a housing market study from a third party confirming that there is indeed a sufficient need for the housing.
And that has been completed, that study?
Not yet, it's in the works. But really, you know, it's one of the sources of data that's referenced in the Strategic Housing Action Plan, I believe, is from a Novogradac study that was done on housing needs in Hudson back in 2017. And
yeah, 2015.
we actually went to the same people at Novogradac to produce our housing market study because they did such a fantastic job.
Okay, thank you.
And Dan, real quick, would you be willing to sign on that after the pilot was completed, that you will not turn it into a non-for-profit and take it off the tax rolls?
Let me look at, I need to explore further what's being described there. I mean, our intention is for this project to meet housing affordability needs while also continuing to support the tax base in the city of Hudson. So, you know, to the extent that, I mean, I guess I would say we could make that commitment if the city could make the commitment to being willing to extend the pilot agreement, because, you know, we want to make sure that the project is financially viable so that we can continue to meet the needs of low income and moderate income households in the city. So it's a two-way street.
I would like to note, though, that the Article 11 only permits a contract for 40 years. That is the term of the pilot that you can offer in this case as a city.
Chris, at the end of it, would there be anything that prevented them from trying to get another pilot, or?
Well, I guess it would depend on the fact situation. You know, they would have to show, sometimes when a project is of that age, they need substantial rehabilitation at that point. So essentially, some of these projects will come in with an entirely new proposal to bring substantial rehabilitation to the project through a refinancing, if you will, of additional subsidy or additional financing sources. So that sometimes does occur. I think that, you know, again, you have a term during which your pilot can exist for. So.
Thank you.
Council, any more questions for Dan? Dan, thanks a lot for coming.
If I may, I would just like to note, again, how much we appreciate the input and the ideas that have come from the council. Two other items that we're ready to commit to is we want to follow up on the idea, which I think was from Alderwoman Garriga, to commit to local hiring for the staff employed at the building. And we can also commit to a preference for housing applicants who currently reside in Hudson. So those are two fantastic ideas that I think have strengthened this project. So, you know, I thank all of you for continuing to help us make this the best possible project for Hudson.
And let me add, you can still contribute if you're not a councilman and not capable of contributing to this conversation. You can still contribute on the website. On the front page of the city website, the North 7th Street Housing Project page, 12 people have written their comments in the past, and that's still available. Or you can write directly to us at the Common Council and let us know your opinion. And John, I'm holding you to that conversation with Dan.
Yes, and definitely. I mean, it's really just about initial construction costs and everything, how that affects the overall contribution. So, and I look forward to talking to you, Dan.
That's great.
And John, Eileen, I hope you'll give us a good update on it. You know, digest it for us, please.
Absolutely.
Or for me, anyway.
I imagine,
no, for all of us.
For all of us, and I imagine Dan he's gonna be as forthcoming as he's been here, so that's fine.
Right.
Thank you.
Dan, just before you go, did I understand correctly that you're going to reissue that income level and rental by unit type?
Yes, I will reissue that.
Okay.
There's a little more information I need to get from our project architects, but I'm going to start working on that. I should have something to you by the end of the week.
And when we talked before, you did not, the plan did not call for any play area or playground space. Is this a reimagined configuration of apartments with more family-friendly spaces causing you to rethink the playground space or the space outside the footprint of the building?
So we definitely want the project to include family-friendly amenities in the building exterior. Whether or not a playground is necessarily the right choice is something we want to look at. The project is very close to Oakdale Park. So we're trying to think of, well, what really would fit a new need for the families living in the building. Certain ideas include garden plots for community gardening for the families so that you can have programming and bring in groups to support families in learning some of those skills. Also just having a picnic area and kind of flexible space so that the families themselves and the tenants themselves can define what the backyard should look like as opposed to us trying to figure it out beforehand. So that's sort of what we're thinking of.
Oh, okay, if you could identify those things just as that kind of bullet list that you've just ticked off, that would really be helpful. I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Also, sorry, I was trying to, if you could add to the proposal what you just mentioned about hiring practices and residents of Hudson, because that seems to me like a really significant commitment. So I appreciate that.
Great. Yes. Yeah. Well, we'll make sure that's all incorporated into the next iteration of the agreement.
Okay. I guess we'll move on. Again, thanks, Dan, for making yourself available all these times. And we'll continue this conversation. The final piece of business is an executive session. So I need a motion to go into, an executive session. I'm sorry, an executive session to discuss some further assessment.
Pending litigation.
Pending litigation, thank you. Pending
Hello, excuse me. This is Ronald Kopnicki.
Yes.
Before you go into executive session, I want to ask, since you seem not to be allowing public comment on the Galvan discussion tonight, will you be allowing it next week at the regular meeting?
Well,
as opposed to
yeah, no, I understand the question. I just,
well,
we're so far. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you're saying that one can communicate in written form. I'm wondering if at the next meeting you will open the floor up to public comment for people who are participating virtually.
Sure, why not? I mean, let's do it. What? Sorry. I don't see why not. I mean, since we're not going to be really deciding anything at the next meeting, at the end of the meeting, yes, we can have a further discussion with the public.
Okay, thanks.
Shouldn't be a problem. Let me make a note of that so I don't forget.
Tom, real quick, is there any idea when we're going to be able to start with our meetings, back to City Hall? Or if we can find a venue that's going to be more socially acceptable in terms of distancing, like the firehouse or something, that we could start, going back into regular sessions?
Please.
I think the governor just extended the emergency order and the ban on in-person meetings till I think through July 7th.
Okay.
Although some of the order isn't terribly clear on how it goes, it clearly seems to have banned in-person public hearings and would seem to also be applying to our meetings also. So it looks like it might be through the beginning of July at least.
We want.
Well, you mean in person?
Who was that, Dominic?
Jeff, yeah, you mean like in person for public hearings or in person for us, if we can wear masks and be socially distanced, you know, and then we still do virtual, you know, for the public, but with us being in-house.
That's what's unclear, Dominic. I think it still does, because we're also still under the rule of limiting the number of people in the meeting in a group. Now, I think the limit's now been raised to 25, so it was just left to the common council. I guess we could probably do it with ourselves, but then we still have to provide a means for the public to listen in on or video on. So those are the issues. And unfortunately, the guidance hasn't been terribly clear, and I don't know if Victoria knows anything better about it, but I don't.
I just miss you guys so much, and I can't wait to see Tom's beard and haircut.
I just can't wait to abandon Zoom. I really wish we could adopt another
Oh, God, do I hate it.
platform. There are better ones. Microsoft is a good one. This one's just so terrible.
Okay, so we'll definitely look into that, Dominic, and see what we
Hey.
can do.
Hey, Tom, this is Michael.
Oh, you're still here. Yeah.
You've heard from me a lot. I wasn't sure if you wanted me to give an update on the architect, but I'm also happy to not do it.
Oh.
Move on.
Sorry, I forgot about that. That wasn't on my thing here. Do you have a proposal? I mean, there's no resolution or anything involved, right?
I was just going to give an update if the council wanted it. Totally up to you. I can skip it too.
Yeah, why don't we skip it for now? So it's because, you know, that went a little long, and we have this executive session, and we can add that to next week.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Thank you. So, as Victoria said, I need a motion to go into executive session to discuss litigation involving assessments.
Specifically Haddad and Howard.
Oh, okay.
Who's Calvin?
John and, was it Calvin?
No, did you release Calvin? I'm sorry.
No, he's back. There he is. Yeah, he's out of prison.
So, are we in executive session?
No, not yet. I need a, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Did you have a second? No.
Yeah, it's John and Calvin.
Okay, aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Aye.
Anyone object?
You need to take a roll call.
I do.
Yeah,
No one said no.
it doesn't matter.
Okay.
It's under these new rules. I should have
Okay.
done it before. We have to do it all by roll call.
Okay. Let's start. Well, I'm going to do it visually because I can't think of the alphabet right now. Jane. Rebecca. Yes.
Aye.
John.
Aye.
Malachi.
Aye.
Eileen.
Aye.
Dewan.
Aye.
Calvin.
Aye.
And Dominic.
Aye.
Okay, so we're going into executive session. Everybody else